Welcome to Dark Untold. Tonight, we journey deep into the Appalachian Mountains, a place of mist, mystery, and terror. From haunted asylums to vanishing children, from ancient legends to creatures of the night, these hills hold stories that blur the line between folklore and reality. Stay with us as we uncover 10 of Appalachia's darkest tales. Only here on Dark Untold. The first thing anyone notices about the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is its size, as if the very stones were placed there, not for the living but for the dead. It looms above the small town of western West Virginia, its wings stretching endlessly, its windows like hollow eyes gazing down at anyone foolish enough to wander too close. The asylum was conceived in a time when doctors believed architecture could heal the mind, and so its hallways were made wide and sunlit, its ceilings vaulted, its walls of strong stone quarried from the land itself. In the beginning, it was meant for 250 souls, a place where those lost to madness might be treated with dignity. But good intentions decay quickly when confronted with the weight of thousands. By the middle of the 20th century, more than 2,000 patients were packed into those same halls, and what had been a sanctuary became a prison, a nightmare of filth, misery, and the endless wailing of broken people. They called it a hospital, but those who lived there knew it by another name. The lunatic asylum was a kingdom of shadows. The doctors and nurses were overworked, underpaid, and often brutal. Restraints were commonplace. Ice baths were given in the name of therapy, bodies plunged into freezing water until lips turned blue. Insulin shock treatments left patients trembling and vomiting on the floor. Electroshock burned through minds until memories scattered like birds. And lobotomies, those quick, surgical destructions of personality, were performed in assembly line fashion by men who thought they were cleansing sickness from the soul. The asylum fed on human suffering, and that suffering seeped into its walls. Long after the doors closed in the 1990s, those who dared to enter whispered that the building was still alive. It groaned in the night, it wept in the rain, it shivered with voices that should not be there. Tourists who came out of curiosity often left pale and shaken, swearing they had felt fingers on their arms, breath on their necks, and seen figures moving in the dark when no one else was near. The stories begin with Lily. She is the most famous ghost of the asylum, a child spirit who wanders the old activity rooms. Some say she was born there, the daughter of a patient who never left. Others claim she was abandoned by her family, raised by the walls until sickness claimed her. Wherever the truth lies, her presence is undeniable. Investigators bring toys for her, bright balls and dolls, and watch in terror as they move by themselves. A ball left in the middle of the room will suddenly roll to the far wall, though no breath of air stirs. A music box will play a lullaby, turning its tune slowly, though no human hand winds it. Those who speak softly to Lily sometimes hear giggles in reply, light and airy, but filled with a sorrow that crushes the heart. They say she likes to hold hands, her touch icy, fragile, and impossibly real. But Lily is only one of many. Down the hallways of the asylum, in the rooms where the most violent patients were kept, shadows stalk. Former guards spoke of attacks, patients leaping without warning, teeth and nails slashing at anyone in reach. Those same rooms now carry that violence in the air. Visitors feel sudden anger, unexplainable rage that makes them clench their fists. Doors slam shut with deafening cracks, locking people inside. A voice shouts obscenities from the darkness, though no human throat produces the sound. In Ward 4, the most dangerous wing of all, a hulking shadow is said to linger. Witnesses describe it as a man in white, sometimes dressed in the hospital uniform of long ago, but its face is blurred, always just out of sight. He paces the corridors as if still on duty, though some believe he is not a doctor or a nurse, but a patient driven mad by solitude. People who see him are filled with dread, as though their very life is being measured. He does not speak. He does not run. He simply watches and then fades away, leaving the taste of iron in the mouth and a chill that cannot be shaken. The asylum chapel, once a place of fragile hope, is now heavy with despair. A piano sits in the corner, its keys warped by time, yet visitors have heard it play on its own. A hymn drifts through the halls, sourceless, the sound of worship twisted into lament. Those who step inside the chapel feel as though eyes are upon them, dozens of them, staring from the shadows between pews. And sometimes, just as they leave, they hear weeping, soft and desperate, as if the spirits themselves are begging for salvation that never came. The most terrifying presence, though, belongs to what staff used to call the creeper. Unlike the other spirits who still wear the shapes of their former lives, the creeper is something else. It crawls on walls and ceilings, a mass of shadow, darker than the night, its limbs too long, its movements insect-like. Those who encounter it describe a crushing weight in their chest, the sudden inability to breathe, and eyes gleaming faintly within the blackness. Some think it is the collection of all the asylum's pain given form by decades of misery. Others say it is something far older, drawn to suffering like a vulture to carrion. Whatever it is, no one forgets the terror of watching it crawl above them, silent and patient, before vanishing back into the darkness. Stories of the asylum's hauntings have spread far beyond West Virginia. Paranormal investigators flock to it, cameras in hand, daring to spend nights inside. They emerge with recordings of disembodied voices, whispers hissing their names, laughter echoing from empty rooms. Some leave with scratches carved into their skin, 3 long marks as though clawed by unseen hands. Others refuse to speak of what they saw, their eyes wide, their voices trembling, as if the memory itself is a curse. And always there is the sense that the building is listening. The wind through the broken windows sounds like sighs. The creak of the floorboards mimics footsteps. The air grows heavy in certain rooms, the walls pressing inward until people flee, gasping. Those who linger too long often dream of the asylum afterward, waking in the night to find themselves whispering names they do not know, names that belong to patients long dead. The history of the place only deepens the horror. Records tell of patients chained to their beds for weeks at a time, their wrists raw, their bodies wasting away. Others were locked in solitary cells so small they could not stretch their arms, left in total darkness until madness consumed them. Nurses struggled to maintain order, and when riots erupted, blood stained the floors. Some patients vanished entirely, their bodies never found, their names scratched from the ledgers. It is said that the asylum consumed them, the walls drinking their lives and trapping their souls forever. Today, the building still stands, its long wings stretching across the land like the arms of a corpse refusing to rot. Tourists walk its corridors, led by guides who know better than to wander alone. They tell of shadows flitting just ahead, of doors that will not open no matter how hard they are pulled, and of sudden cold spots where the breath becomes visible even in summer. Skeptics come expecting tricks of the mind, only to leave whispering prayers. Believers come seeking proof, and most find more than they ever wished. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is more than haunted. It is alive with sorrow, pulsing with the remnants of thousands of lives broken and discarded. To walk its halls is to walk in the company of the dead, to feel their misery brushing against your skin, to hear their voices rise in a chorus of despair. Some say it is cursed, others that it is merely the natural result of so much suffering. But all who have entered agree on one thing: you do not leave unchanged. Something of the asylum follows you, lingering in the corners of your vision, whispering in the quiet moments of the night, waiting until you remember what you saw and shiver in the dark. At night, the asylum becomes something more than a ruin. The moonlight casts the towers in silver, but the shadows that stretch across the grounds are darker than any natural night should be. People who pass by on the road late after dark sometimes glimpse lights in the upper windows as though lanterns were being carried through the halls, but the building has no electricity, and no one dares to wander alone inside after the doors are locked. Local police have responded to countless calls about movement in the asylum, only to find it silent, the dust undisturbed, the corridors empty. Yet when they leave, more than one officer has sworn they felt eyes watching from the upper floors, tracking them until they were gone. Inside, the air thickens as the hours crawl toward midnight. The spirits grow bolder, their whispers louder, their touches colder. Investigators who linger in the surgery wing often hear the faint clink of metal, the scrape of instruments being prepared for another procedure. The lobotomy room is infamous. A rusted chair sits bolted to the floor, straps frayed, the tray beside it littered with stains that have never washed clean. Those who sit in the chair report sudden migraines, searing pain behind the eyes, and visions of a white-coated figure approaching with a shining pick. Some leave screaming, clawing at their own faces as though trying to tear the memory out. In the women's ward, cries echo in the night. They are sharp and shrill, cutting through the silence, but when the doors are opened, the rooms are empty. Some say they have seen figures huddled in the corners, rocking back and forth, arms wrapped tightly around themselves, only for the figures to vanish when light falls upon them. Once, a tourist fainted after a figure stepped directly from the shadows, a woman in a torn gown, her face covered in bruises, her eyes hollow. She reached out with trembling hands before fading into the wall as though she had never been. The men's ward carries its own horrors. Growls reverberate from empty cells, and shadows stretch longer than they should, as though the bodies casting them are twice their size. Visitors describe the sudden sensation of being shoved, sometimes hard enough to send them to the floor, though no one is near. One man staggered out with scratches bleeding down his back, 3 deep gashes that burned as though fresh, though no blade had touched him. He never returned, and he never spoke of what he had seen, though those close to him said he woke screaming for months afterward. Legends swirl of certain spirits who refuse to be forgotten. One is a patient named Joe, murdered by his fellow inmates. He was cornered in a bathroom, beaten with a bed frame until his skull cracked. His ghost lingers in that same bathroom, a heavy presence that fills the lungs with the smell of iron and rot. People who dare to enter often feel a crushing weight on their chests, as though invisible hands are pressing them to the floor. Others hear muffled screams, the sound of fists striking flesh, and then silence so thick it chokes. Another spirit is that of a nurse, known only as Mary. She worked tirelessly, but exhaustion and despair claimed her. Some say she took her own life in the basement, unable to bear the cries around her any longer. Now she wanders the lower halls, her footsteps soft, her voice a whisper. Visitors hear her calling their names, though she never knew them in life. She beckons them deeper, always deeper, until the air turns cold and the darkness closes in. Few have followed, and those who did ran back, terrified, swearing they saw her face pale as paper, her mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. The asylum grounds are no safer than the building itself. On still nights, the courtyard is filled with phantom voices, conversations overlapping, laughter tinged with hysteria. Figures pace the grass, outlines of men and women repeating the same steps again and again, like broken memories on a loop. Dogs brought on to the property growl and whine, their fur bristling, refusing to cross the threshold. Locals avoid walking near even in daylight, for they say the asylum watches, its windows reflecting shapes that are not truly there. What unnerves visitors most is how personal the hauntings become. It is not just random footsteps or slamming doors. The spirits seem to know who has entered. Names are whispered in empty corridors, names never spoken aloud. Cold hands brush the arms of those most afraid. Some investigators have played recordings from their devices, only to hear their own voices calling out when they had never spoken. One woman collapsed after hearing her dead father's voice whisper, "Come home," though he had never set foot in West Virginia. It is as if the asylum bends reality, weaving together fragments of the living and the dead into one endless nightmare. The creeper remains the most feared. It shows itself rarely, but when it does, the experience leaves scars. Witnesses say it begins with silence. The air grows still, the building seems to hold its breath. Then the shape slithers across the ceiling, limbs contorted, its body nothing but a black mass darker than shadow. It crawls upside down, head twisting at impossible angles, eyes burning faint red. Those who meet its gaze feel their hearts stutter, their thoughts splinter. One man dropped to his knees, clawing at his chest, convinced something was inside him. Another ran screaming into the night and was found miles away, babbling about the black thing that eats the light. None who have seen it doubt its reality. Whether it is a spirit born of human torment, or a creature far older, no one knows. The asylum itself seems endless. Doors open onto staircases that lead nowhere. Windows look out onto walls of stone. Some visitors report becoming lost in hallways that should not exist, walking in circles until panic sets in, only to find themselves suddenly back at the entrance as if the building had swallowed and spit them out. Dreams follow afterward, vivid nightmares of being trapped in the asylum again, hallways stretching to infinity, voices calling from every direction. Sleep becomes difficult, and more than one person has confessed to waking in their own homes to see the outline of the asylum's long wings outside their window impossible, and terrifying. The town of Weston has learned to live with its infamous neighbor. Some welcome the visitors it brings, curious tourists hungry for a brush with the paranormal. Others avoid the subject entirely, their families carrying memories of loved ones locked away there, lost to treatments that were little more than cruelty. For them, the asylum is not a haunted attraction, but a scar that never healed. Still, the building stands, its walls do not crumble, its towers do not fall. The ghosts remain, voices of the forgotten echoing through the stone. And those who dare to walk its halls leave with the same conclusion, spoken in trembling voices: the asylum is not empty. It never has been, it never will be. The suffering lingers, feeding the shadows, birthing phantoms from pain. The dead are not at rest in western West Virginia. They walk the asylum still, waiting for someone to listen, waiting for someone to scream, waiting for someone to stay behind and never leave. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is a place where time has collapsed. The past bleeds into the present, and the dead walk beside the living. To enter is to gamble with your sanity, to feel the thin line between life and death dissolve. Some leave shaken, others leave marked, and a few, perhaps, do not leave at all. The asylum takes what it wants, and what it wants most is company. The rolling hills of Tennessee in the early 19th century were quiet, pastoral, and cloaked in the kind of mystery only deep woods can hold. Settlers carved their lives out of the land, raising farms, building homes, and establishing small communities. Among them was the Bell family, ordinary farmers living near the Red River in Robertson County. But between 1817 and 1821, their name would become forever entwined with one of the most terrifying hauntings in American history. It began with something small. John Bell, the patriarch of the family, was out walking his fields one autumn evening in 1817 when he noticed an animal among the rows of corn. At first glance, it looked like a dog, but as he stepped closer, he realized something was terribly wrong. The creature had the body of a dog, but the head of a rabbit, its eyes glowing unnaturally in the twilight. Before he could react, it vanished. That same night, the Bell children began to complain of strange noises, soft tapping along the walls, the sound of gnawing on bedposts, the rustling of sheets when no one was moving. At first, the family dismissed it as the sounds of an old farmhouse, the creaks and groans of timber settling. But soon the noises grew louder, more deliberate, knocking, dragging, even the clinking of chains echoing through the night. Within weeks, the disturbances escalated. The children awoke to their blankets being pulled from their beds. Invisible hands slapped their faces. Their hair was yanked violently, leaving them screaming in the dark. One daughter, Betsy Bell, seemed to suffer the most. She was pinched, scratched, and beaten by a force no one could see. Word spread quickly among neighbors. Fear mixed with curiosity, and soon people began to visit the Bell home to witness the phenomena for themselves. What they encountered left no doubt something unnatural was happening. Visitors heard disembodied voices whispering in the darkness, mocking and jeering. They saw chairs slide across the room on their own. They felt icy hands brush against their skin. Over time, the spirit grew stronger, more vocal. It began to speak at first in faint murmurs that grew into a clear woman's voice. The entity identified itself as Kate, claiming to be the spirit of Kate Batts, a neighbor of the Bells who had quarreled with John Bell years earlier over a piece of land. Though some doubted the truth of the claim, everyone agreed on one thing. Kate's hatred for John Bell was absolute. "Old Jack Bell," the spirit would sneer, "I'll have your life." The haunting consumed the Bell family. Their once peaceful farm became a place of torment. Betsy, still just a young girl, was relentlessly abused. The spirit mocked her attempts at romance, breaking off her engagement by tormenting both her and her suitor until they could no longer endure. Neighbors tried to help, ministers prayed over the home, but nothing drove Kate away. Instead, the witch grew bolder. She sang hymns in mocking tones, repeated sermons word for word after hearing them only once, and engaged in debates about scripture with visiting clergymen. She seemed to know everyone's secrets, exposing private conversations and humiliating guests. Her voice would echo through the house, shrill and cackling, sometimes soft and mournful. She was not just a ghost, she was a personality, a presence that demanded attention. Even General Andrew Jackson, who would later become President of the United States, visited the Bell farm. He had heard the stories and wanted to see for himself. With a party of men, he rode up to the farm in 1819, boasting about how he would face the witch. But as their wagon approached, the wheels suddenly froze. The horses strained but could not move the load. Jackson reportedly exclaimed, "By the eternal, boys, it must be the witch." A voice answered, mocking and cold, "All right, General, you can come on now." The wheels loosened and the wagon moved again. That night, Jackson's men endured terrifying experiences, beds shaking, blankets torn away, unseen hands striking them. By morning, the general had had enough. He left the Bell farm, declaring he would rather fight the entire British army than face the Bell Witch again. But the most chilling part of the haunting remained its relentless attack on John Bell. He grew weaker as the years went on. His health declined mysteriously, with bouts of trembling, choking, and paralysis. The witch taunted him, proclaiming she would kill him soon. On December 20th, 1820, John Bell was found unconscious, his body racked with spasms. Near his bedside was a vial of strange black liquid. No one in the family recognized it. When the witch was confronted, her voice rang out through the house. "I gave old Jack Bell a big dose of that last night, and he'll never get up again." By the next day, John Bell was dead. At his funeral, attended by hundreds, the witch's voice echoed one last time, laughing and singing joyfully as the mourners wept. "He's gone!" she shrieked. "I've got him at last!" After John's death, the haunting subsided, though it never disappeared entirely. Betsy continued to be tormented until she finally broke off her engagement, as the witch demanded. Then in 1821, the spirit announced she would leave, but promised to return in 7 years. True to her word, in 1828, she reappeared briefly, visiting John Bell Jr., engaging him in long conversations about the past and the future, even predicting events yet to come. And then she vanished. The Bell Witch legend has lingered in Tennessee for over 2 centuries. Skeptics argue the haunting was nothing more than mass hysteria, family dysfunction, or a hoax. Believers insist there are too many witnesses, too many details for it to be explained away so easily. The story remains one of the best documented hauntings in American folklore, with dozens of first-hand accounts recorded at the time. Even today, the land where the Bell farm once stood is said to be cursed. The Bell Witch Cave near the old homestead draws visitors who report strange lights, eerie voices, and the feeling of being watched. Locals warn against provoking the spirit, saying the witch still lingers, waiting for anyone foolish enough to challenge her. What makes the Bell Witch haunting so terrifying is not only the violence it inflicted, but its personality. This was no mindless ghost rattling chains in the dark. It was intelligent, cunning, and malicious. It knew secrets, mocked faith, and manipulated lives. It declared its hatred openly and carried out its threats with chilling precision. And perhaps that is why the story still grips the imagination after 200 years. The Bell Witch reminds us that some evils cannot be buried, some spirits cannot be silenced, and some forces in the Appalachian wilderness remain beyond explanation. In the quiet of the Tennessee hills, when the wind stirs through the trees and the night grows heavy, some still swear they hear her voice, a mocking laugh, a whispered curse, a reminder that the Bell Witch is never truly gone. The Appalachian Mountains are filled with mysteries, but few are as enduring or as chilling as the strange phenomenon known as the Brown Mountain Lights. For more than 2 centuries, witnesses have reported glowing orbs rising from the ridge of Brown Mountain in North Carolina, drifting eerily through the air before vanishing into the darkness. Some say the lights are the restless souls of the dead. Others insist they are warnings from ancient spirits. Skeptics argue for natural explanations, gases, reflections, or distant headlights. But no matter how many theories arise, the lights remain, appearing again and again, defying science and terrifying those who dare to chase them. The earliest accounts come from Native American folklore, long before settlers ever built cabins in the Blue Ridge. The Cherokee and Catawba tribes both told stories of ghostly warriors who carried torches across the mountain at night. According to legend, these were the spirits of braves, slain in ancient battles, still searching for their loved ones. Others believed the lights were the souls of women, wandering the ridge in eternal mourning, holding lanterns as they sought their lost husbands. For generations, the tribes avoided the mountain after dark, warning that the spirits would lure the living to join them. In 1771, German engineer John William Gerard de Bram recorded strange glowing orbs while surveying the area. He described fiery vapors rising from the ground, floating in mid-air before disappearing. The report was archived, but locals already knew of the lights. Hunters, trappers, and farmers whispered about them, swearing never to linger too long on the mountain once the sun had set. By the mid-19th century, the Brown Mountain Lights had become a fixture of Appalachian ghost lore. Families gathered on porches at night, pointing toward the horizon when the lights appeared. "There they are again," someone would whisper, and the children would clutch their mother's skirts, too frightened to look directly. The most enduring story tied to the lights is one of heartbreak and violence. According to local legend, in the early 1800s, a woman lived in a small cabin at the foot of Brown Mountain with her young child. Her husband was a trapper who often ventured deep into the wilderness for days at a time. One autumn, he left and never returned. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, until the woman realized he was gone for good, killed perhaps by an animal or an enemy. Heartbroken, she took her lantern and went searching through the night. She searched the woods, the trails, the rocky slopes of Brown Mountain, calling his name until her voice went hoarse. She never found him. But the people of the valley began to notice something strange. Even after the woman died, lights continued to drift along the mountain ridge, swaying like lanterns carried by invisible hands. "It's her," the townsfolk said, still searching for her husband, even in death. The story spread, and to this day some claim the brown mountain lights are the widow's eternal vigil. The phenomenon became so famous that in 1913 the US Geological Survey was sent to investigate. Scientists concluded the lights were nothing more than distant locomotive headlights reflecting against the valley mist. It seemed a rational explanation until a flood washed away the train tracks. Still, the lights continued. Another investigation in 1922 tried to settle the mystery again, this time attributing the orbs to car headlights from the newly built highways. But locals scoffed. The lights had been there long before cars or trains ever came to the region. And besides, how could headlights rise vertically into the sky, hovering silently before fading into nothingness? Witnesses describe the lights in chilling detail. They appear as glowing spheres, white, yellow, orange, or even red, shimmering like fireflies but much larger. Sometimes they float slowly above the treetops, other times they dart with unnatural speed. Hunters tell of lights following them through the forest, weaving between trees as though alive. Some say the orbs have chased their wagons or trucks, keeping pace effortlessly before vanishing into the shadows. One man claimed he was stalked by a single light for nearly an hour as he tried to make his way home through the woods. The orb hovered just behind him, no matter how fast he walked, pulsing brighter whenever he looked over his shoulder. When he finally broke into a run, the light darted ahead, blocking his path. Terrified, he dropped to his knees and prayed aloud. Only then did the light flicker and fade into the darkness. He never again set foot on Brown Mountain. Others believe the lights are omens of death. In 1916, a massive flood swept through the region, killing dozens. Survivors later swore they had seen the Brown Mountain lights blazing unusually bright in the days before the disaster, as though warning of the tragedy to come. Similar claims have been made after mining accidents, house fires, and violent storms. When the lights burn strong, locals whisper, death follows. The legends grew so widespread that the Brown Mountain lights entered American popular culture. They inspired songs, ghost stories, and even television features. Yet despite the fame, the core mystery has never been solved. Skeptics cling to explanations of swamp gas, ball lightning, or misidentified man-made lights. But believers insist no natural phenomenon explains the intelligence behind the orbs, the way they seem to follow people, respond to fear, and appear on command. Indeed, many visitors have tried to summon the lights. Tourists gather at overlooks, waiting in silence as the night grows thick. Sometimes nothing happens. Other times, faint glimmers rise from the ridge, like sparks floating from a fire. The bravest call out into the darkness, daring the spirits to appear. More often than not, the lights respond, brightening, multiplying, drifting closer until even the boldest are forced to retreat. To this day, locals warn that chasing the Brown Mountain lights is dangerous. Hunters disappear. Hikers lose their way and are never seen again. Some say the lights are not just spirits of the dead, but guides into another world, luring the living across a boundary from which they cannot return. And perhaps that is what makes the Brown Mountain lights so terrifying. They are not a single ghost, not one haunting tied to a tragic story. They are something older, something elemental, tied to the land itself. They are part of the mountain, eternal and unknowable. When the fog rolls in and the night is clear, you may see them, drifting, pulsing, burning in silence. Are they lost souls, ancient warnings, or a force that has no name? No one can say. But those who have seen the brown mountain lights never forget them. Even now, on quiet nights, travelers stop along the Blue Ridge Parkway, gazing into the dark valley below. And when the orbs rise, glowing against the black mountain ridge, a chill runs down their spines. The lights are still there, as they always have been, waiting. The Appalachian Hills have long been home to strange sightings, but none more terrifying than what happened on a September evening in 1952. In the small, quiet town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, a group of ordinary people stumbled into something extraordinary, something monstrous. What they saw that night has never been fully explained, and it remains one of the most chilling encounters in Appalachian folklore, the legend of the Flatwoods Monster. It began on September 12, 1952. The day had been unremarkable, hot and muggy as summer clung to the hills. As the sun dipped below the mountains, children played outside, chasing one another across dusty yards. In the tiny community of Flatwoods, life moved slowly, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, and nothing much ever happened. That evening, however, everything changed. Around 7:15 p.m., two brothers, Edward and Fred May, and their friend Tommy Heyer, spotted something streaking across the sky. A glowing object, fiery and fast, tore overhead and crashed into a hillside near the farm of a local man named G. Bailey Fisher. Startled but curious, the boys ran to tell Kathleen May, Edward and Fred's mother. Breathless, they begged her to come see what had fallen. Kathleen, skeptical but intrigued, agreed. She rounded up a flashlight and accompanied the boys, joined by local teenager Eugene Lemon, a National Guardsman, and a few other neighborhood kids. They set off toward the hillside, the children chattering nervously, Kathleen trying to maintain control, and Eugene, tall and serious, leading the way with the flashlight. The group climbed up the path toward the crash site, expecting to find a meteorite or perhaps a small airplane wreck. As they neared the top of the ridge, however, a strange odor hit them. It was sharp and metallic, almost sulfurous, burning their throats and making their eyes water. Then came the mist. A thick, unnatural fog clung to the ground, curling between the trees. The flashlight beam cut through the haze, but it seemed swallowed by the darkness, as if the mist itself resisted being seen through. The children whispered in fear, but Eugene pressed forward, determined to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. And then they saw it. At the edge of the flashlight's beam, standing beneath a gnarled oak tree, loomed a figure unlike anything they had ever seen. It was enormous, at least 10 feet tall, its body towering over the group. Its head was shaped like a spade, with a pointed crown and glowing red eyes that seemed to burn into their souls. The eyes were set wide apart, unblinking, luminous in the darkness. Beneath the head, the figure's body seemed mechanical, metallic, almost like armor. Some described it as draped in dark, pleated fabric, like a cloak, but others swore it moved with a metallic grinding, like steel plates shifting. The creature's hands were twisted, claw-like, with long fingers ending in talons that scraped against the branches as it shifted. A low, hissing noise emanated from it, like machinery gasping for breath. the smell grew stronger, acrid and suffocating. For a moment the group froze, paralyzed by fear. Then Eugene raised the flashlight higher, the beam catching the creature's glowing eyes directly. The monster emitted a sharp, shrill hiss and began to glide, yes, glide toward them. Its movement was unnatural, not walking, not stepping, but floating just above the ground. The children screamed. Kathleen grabbed her sons and shouted for everyone to run. They tore back down the hillside, crashing through the brush, stumbling in panic. Eugene tripped, dropping the flashlight, but scrambled up again, the terror in his eyes driving him faster. The group didn't stop until they reached the safety of the May house, gasping and trembling, the smell of sulfur still clinging to their clothes. News of the sighting spread quickly through the small town. Neighbors gathered to hear Kathleen May and the children recount what they had seen. Their stories matched, every detail the same. Within hours, law enforcement was involved. Reporters from nearby towns descended on Flatwoods, eager to hear about the monster. That night, others in the area reported seeing strange lights in the sky, glowing objects darting above the ridges. When investigators returned to the crash site the next day, they found unusual marks on the ground, skid marks, scorch marks, and patches of flattened grass. The odor still lingered in the air, faint but undeniable. No meteorite was found, no wreckage, only the uneasy silence of the Appalachian forest. Over the next few days, the witnesses began to suffer strange symptoms. Their throats burned, their noses ran constantly, and their eyes watered. Doctors called it irritation from some kind of gas or chemical exposure. But the children insisted it came from the creature. The sulfur, the mist, the hissing, something unnatural had touched them. Skeptics called it mass hysteria, the product of imagination in a small town. They claimed the children had seen an owl perched on a branch, its eyes reflecting the flashlight, and their fear had turned it into a monster. The metallic body, they said, was just the illusion of shadows and mist. Others claimed the fiery object in the sky was nothing more than a meteor, but those who were there that night never wavered. Kathleen May went on record describing the monster's features in vivid detail, even sketching it for reporters. Eugene Lemon, the guardsman, was so shaken he could barely speak of it without trembling. The children never forgot the way the creature's eyes glowed, nor the way it moved toward them without sound. In the decades since, the Flatwoods monster has become legend. Some say it was an alien, the survivor of a crashed spacecraft that landed on the mountain that night. Others claim it was a government experiment gone wrong, wandering free before being captured and covered up. A few even whisper that the creature still roams the hills, appearing only on dark nights when strange lights flicker in the sky. The town of Flatwoods has embraced the story, turning the monster into a local icon, but for those who stood on that ridge in 1952, it was no mascot. It was terror incarnate, a nightmare come to life in the misty woods of Appalachia. Even now, hikers who venture into the hills sometimes report strange lights above the trees or catch the acrid whiff of sulfur with no source. And every so often a story emerges of a tall, spade-headed figure glimpsed in the shadows, glowing eyes watching silently from the dark. The Flatwoods monster may never be explained. Was it an alien, a spirit, or something else entirely? No one can say for certain, but one truth remains. That night in 1952, something came down from the sky, and it left its mark not just on the ground of West Virginia, but on the minds of those who saw it. And perhaps on quiet nights in Appalachia, it still waits cloaked in the mist, its burning eyes fixed on the next unlucky soul who dares to look too closely. The story of the Greenbrier ghost begins in the quiet valleys of Greenbrier County, West Virginia, in the final years of the 19th century. The Appalachian Mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, cloaked in dense forests that whispered with the weight of centuries. Life in the region was simple, bound by tradition and superstition. People relied on faith, folklore, and the land itself. But in 1897, one story would rise from these hills that blurred the line between the living and the dead, a story that would forever etch itself into American folklore and the annals of lore. Her name was Elva Zona Heister. She was 23 years old, young, beautiful, with the vitality of someone whose life should have been just beginning. To her neighbors, she was friendly, reserved, and often seen with a quiet smile. Yet Zona's life had not been without hardship. In a time when women's roles were tightly bound by custom, every choice she made would be scrutinized. That winter, Zona met a man who seemed to promise her an escape from the small-town rhythms she had always known. His name was Erasmus Trout Shue, a blacksmith who had recently come to Greenbrier County in search of work. Shue was tall, strong, and carried himself with confidence. He had a quick smile and a persuasive charm that easily won over those who met him. It wasn't long before he and Zona began courting, their romance moving quickly. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heister, was less enchanted. From the very beginning, she distrusted Shue. Something about him felt wrong, though she could not put her suspicions into words. He was secretive, she said, and there was a coldness beneath his easy smile. Despite her warnings, Zona married Shue in October 1896. For a brief moment, it seemed Zona had found happiness. But the happiness did not last. On January 23, 1897, a boy was sent to the Shue home on an errand. He entered the small house and found Zona lying motionless at the foot of the stairs. Her body was stretched out on the floor, her legs straight, one arm at her side, the other across her chest. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly, glassy with death. Terrified, the boy ran to fetch his mother, and soon the doctor, George W. Knapp, was called. When Dr. Knapp arrived, Shue was already there, cradling his wife's body, sobbing uncontrollably. His grief was so intense that Knapp could barely examine the corpse. Every time the doctor tried to inspect Zona's head or neck, Shue would erupt in a fit of anguish, cradling her more tightly, insisting she be left alone. Still, Knapp noted strange details. Zona's body had been dressed before his arrival, something unusual in itself. She wore a high-collared dress, stiff and formal, with a large scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Shue insisted the dress was Zona's favorite, that she would have wanted to be remembered that way. Knapp, perhaps swayed by the husband's grief, declared her death a result of everlasting faint, a vague term that implied a sudden heart failure. Later, the cause was quietly amended to childbirth, though there was no sign she had been pregnant. Zona was buried quickly. But her mother, Mary Jane, could not rest. Something gnawed at her relentlessly. She had never trusted Shue, and now her daughter was gone after only 3 months of marriage. During the funeral, she had noticed the same strange scarf, wrapped and pinned unnaturally tight. When she tried to adjust it, Shu snapped at her with such ferocity that she backed away, chilled to the bone. At night, Mary Jane prayed for answers. For 4 long weeks, she begged for the truth, for her daughter to come back and tell her what had happened. And then, one night, Zona came. It began with a flicker of cold air in the small, darkened room. The house fell silent, and then Zona appeared at the foot of her mother's bed. She was pale, shimmering, her form both real and unreal, her eyes filled with sorrow. Her voice was soft but resolute as she told her mother the truth. She had not died from illness. She had been murdered. According to Zona's ghost, Shu was cruel and violent. He had a temper that could ignite into fury without warning. On the night of her death, he had come home in a rage because she had not prepared the meat he wanted for dinner. His anger escalated until, in a fit of blind rage, he broke her neck. Zona's ghost turned her head slowly, deliberately, until her neck made the sound of snapping bone. Her head twisted completely around to face her back, a horrifying confirmation of how she had died. The apparition came to Mary Jane 4 nights in a row, each time repeating the story, each time twisting her neck to prove her words. Zona begged her mother to seek justice. By the 4th night, the haunting stopped, leaving Mary Jane shaken but determined. The story spread quickly. At first, people whispered of Mary Jane's visions as if they were nothing more than grief-stricken delusions, but her persistence drew the attention of the local prosecutor, John Alfred Preston. He was skeptical, but intrigued. Mary Jane's details were consistent, and her certainty was unshakable. Preston ordered Zona's body exhumed. The examination took place in a small 1-room schoolhouse near the cemetery. Dr. Knapp, who had once declared her death natural, now conducted a more thorough autopsy with other physicians present. This time, there was no Shu hovering over the body to interfere. And what they found confirmed everything Mary Jane had claimed. Zona's neck had been broken, her windpipe was crushed, her ligaments torn, and her neck had been snapped cleanly at the first vertebra. The conclusion was undeniable. She had been murdered. Suspicion immediately turned to Shu. His behavior had already been erratic. He had insisted on dressing the body, he had prevented the doctor's examination, and he had reacted violently to anyone touching the scarf around Zona's neck. Now, with the evidence of murder, he was arrested. During the trial, the prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. Witnesses described Shu's strange behavior, his controlling nature, and his violent temper. The medical examination left little doubt. Zona's death was no accident. But what made the trial truly unique, what made it echo through history, was the testimony of Mary Jane Heaster. On the stand, she told the jury about the ghostly visits from her daughter. She recounted in detail how Zona had appeared, how she had confessed to the murder, and how she had shown the twisting of her neck. The courtroom was silent as Mary Jane spoke. Though the judge instructed the jury to consider only the physical evidence, her testimony lingered in their minds. In the end, the jury found Erasmus Trout Shu guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he died 3 years later, never confessing to the crime. Zona was finally at peace. The legend of the Greenbrier ghost has endured because it occupies a space where lore, folklore, and the supernatural collide. It remains the only case in American history where the testimony of a ghost was admitted in court and used to convict a murderer. In Greenbrier County, the story is still told, passed down through generations. A historical marker near the cemetery reads, "Interred in this cemetery is Zona Heaster Shoe." Her death in 1897 was at first thought to be natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband, Edward. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified the ghost's account. Edward was found guilty of murder, only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. Even today, visitors leave flowers at Zona's grave. Some claim to feel a cold presence near the marker, a chill in the air that doesn't belong to the season. Others whisper of a shadowy figure drifting through the trees at night, head bent at an unnatural angle. The story endures because it speaks to something deep within us, the belief that truth cannot be buried, that the dead will not rest until justice is done. And so the Greenbrier ghost lingers, her tale a haunting reminder that the mountains of Appalachia are filled with more than just silence and trees. They hold secrets, and sometimes the dead themselves rise to speak them. In the high ridges of the Appalachian Mountains, where the forests of North Carolina and Tennessee grow so thick the sun itself must fight to pierce their canopy, the Cherokee people whispered of a being older than the trees themselves. She was known as Utlunta, Spearfinger, the witch whose very body was made of stone and whose single, long, sharp finger gleamed like a blade. Her story was not told to entertain, but to warn, for the Cherokee believed she was real, a predator who walked among them with the hunger of an unending night. Spearfinger lived in the shadows of the Smoky Mountains, wandering between the mist-shrouded peaks and valleys. Her skin was hard as granite, impervious to arrows or knives, and her strength was beyond human measure. She was a mimic, able to take on the appearance of those the Cherokee trusted most, mothers, grandmothers, sisters, friends. Yet no matter what face she wore, the single stone finger remained, a terrible weapon she used to cut into her victims. With it, she sliced into their flesh and stole their livers, for it was said that her hunger could only be satisfied by the soft, living organ that pulsed with life. The Cherokee feared her not only because of her cruelty, but because she was clever. She did not strike like a beast in the night. She stalked, studied, and deceived. A child wandering near the river might see the comforting figure of his grandmother and run into her arms, only to feel the cold stone hand press against his back, the blade-like finger sliding into his side before he could scream. A hunter might hear the voice of his wife calling him through the forest, step eagerly toward her, and never return. When the body was found, if it was found at all, the face would be twisted in horror and the chest hollowed where the liver had been taken. The Cherokee told of how the earth itself seemed to aid her. Rocks shifted beneath her feet, creating no sound. Birds grew silent when she passed. Even the dogs, so keen to sense danger, would not bark at her approach, as if they too were bound by some unspoken fear. And always, when the wind howled down the mountain slopes at night, it carried her voice, calling in the tones of loved ones long dead. One of the oldest stories told of a village that lived near the base of what is now called Whiteside Mountain. For weeks, children had been disappearing, vanishing while fetching water or gathering berries. The people grew desperate, forming hunting parties to scour the woods. One evening, a boy stumbled back into the village, pale and shaking. He claimed he had seen the missing children with an old woman in the forest. They had smiled at him, beckoned him to join them, and the woman had spoken with the voice of his mother. Yet her eyes had glowed yellow, and when she reached for him, he saw the glint of the stone finger. He had fled, running until his legs gave out. The hunters followed his trail into the mountains, but they found only silence and the faint impression of feet in the earth, far larger than those of any woman. The Cherokee knew that Spearfinger's stone skin made her invulnerable to weapons. Arrows shattered on her chest, knives snapped against her arms. Even fire, they said, could not harm her. Many warriors tried, and many died, their bodies later found without their livers. Some claimed her heart was hidden in her hand, within the very stone finger she used to kill, and that to destroy her, one would need to strike at that impossible place. Her cruelty was boundless. She did not only hunt to feed, she hunted to terrify. Families spoke of hearing scratching at their doors at night, like a claw dragging across the wood. When they opened the door, nothing was there, only the echo of her laughter carried by the wind. Sometimes they woke to find her shadow cast against the wall of their lodge, tall and crooked, though no one stood outside. And when sickness struck, when fever burned through a household, the Cherokee whispered that Spearfinger had passed by, brushing her cursed hand across the roof, to mark it for death. The legend told of one night in autumn, when the leaves had turned red and gold, when Spearfinger came down from the mountains disguised as an old woman. She walked into a village where the people were gathered around a fire, telling stories as the stars glimmered above. They greeted her with respect, offering food, for among the Cherokee the elderly were honored. She sat with them, speaking in a voice gentle and warm, sharing tales of her travels. Yet as the night wore on, children grew sleepy and climbed into her lap, lulled by her soft words. One by one she wrapped her stony arms around them, and when the parents awoke in the morning, their children were gone. The tracks led into the mountains, and though the hunters pursued for days, they never saw the old woman again. Only the cries of children echoed through the canyons, fading as if swallowed by the stone itself. In another tale, she appeared as a grieving mother, wailing beside a river. Hunters approached her cautiously, asking what had happened. She told them her child had drowned and begged for their help to find the body. Moved by her anguish, the hunters waded into the river to search. When they turned back, she was gone, and one of their own was lying lifeless on the shore, his chest torn open, his liver missing. The others fled in terror, their cries echoing through the forest. Spearfinger's hunger was said to be insatiable, and even the animals feared her. Bears and wolves avoided the valleys she roamed, and deer would not graze where her scent lingered. To the Cherokee, this was the greatest warning of all. When the forest itself grows silent, beware. For silence meant Spearfinger walked nearby, yet she was not without weakness, though it was hidden. The story tells of a great gathering of the Cherokee people who came together after too many of their loved ones had fallen. They prayed to the Great Spirit for guidance, and in their dreams, the animals of the forest spoke to them. The small chickadee bird, known for its keen sight, told them that Spearfinger's heart was not in her chest, but hidden in the stone finger she wielded. "Strike there," the bird whispered, and she would fall. The people formed a plan. They dug a great pit and filled it with sharpened stakes, then covered it with branches and leaves. They spread word that they were gathering for a feast, and as they expected, Spearfinger came, drawn by the sound of laughter and the smell of food. She appeared in the form of a kindly grandmother, her stone finger hidden beneath a shawl. She sat among them, listening, smiling, waiting for the moment to strike. Then, as the drums beat and the people danced, the ground beneath her gave way. She fell into the pit, impaled upon the stakes. The warriors raised their bows and fired, but the arrows bounced harmlessly from her stone skin. She laughed, her voice booming across the mountains, mocking their efforts. "You cannot harm me," she taunted. "I am of the earth, and I cannot be destroyed." But the chickadee flew down and perched upon her hand, chirping loudly. The warriors understood. They aimed their arrows at her stone finger, the spear that had claimed so many lives. The arrow struck true, shattering the stone, and with it, her heart. Spearfinger let out a scream that shook the mountains, her body crumbling into dust and rock. The ground trembled, the trees shook, and then there was silence. The Cherokee rejoiced, believing the terror was ended. But they knew better than to forget. For though her body was destroyed, her spirit lingered. The mountains themselves seemed to hold her memory, and even after generations, hunters claimed to see her shadow among the ridges or hear her voice in the wind. Children were still warned not to stray far from the village, for Spearfinger was patient, and stone endures. Some elders whispered that she was not the only one of her kind. Legends spoke of another stone witch, her sister, who lived in the mountains far to the north. If Spearfinger had been destroyed, perhaps her kin still walked, waiting for the time to reclaim her vengeance. Others said that Spearfinger's spirit seeped into the very rocks of the Appalachians, and that each landslide, each sudden crack of stone, was her echoing wrath. Even now, hikers in the Smoky Mountains tell strange stories. They speak of hearing their own names called in familiar voices, though no one else is near. They describe finding strange triangular gouges carved into trees, as though by a single sharp claw. Some wake to see an old woman standing at the edge of their camp, watching, her hand hidden beneath a shawl. And always, they say, the air feels colder when she is near, the weight of stone pressing down upon their lungs. The Cherokee believed Spearfinger was more than a monster. She was a reminder of the dangers that lurk in trust misplaced, of the darkness that can wear a familiar face. Her legend endures not because of the horror of her deeds, but because she embodies the terror of betrayal. She was a mother's voice calling you home, a grandmother's hand reaching to embrace you, a sister's laughter drawing you close, and then the pain of a blade sliding into your flesh, the realization that love itself had been a mask. Spearfinger remains one of the most feared beings of Appalachian lore. Her story has crossed centuries, carried from fireside to fireside, because the Cherokee knew what all people know. Monsters are most dangerous not when they are strangers, but when they pretend to be family. And in the endless forests of the Smoky Mountains, where shadows move like living things and the wind carries whispers in voices you thought long gone, it is easy to believe she still walks, searching, always searching, for the warmth of a liver to quiet the hunger of stone. The Appalachian region is a place steeped in mist, folklore, and a haunting silence that seems to stretch across its ancient hills. Of all the legends that drift from its valleys and small towns, none has captured the imagination, terror, and obsession of locals and outsiders alike quite like the story of the Mothman of Point Pleasant. This isn't just a simple tale of a cryptid lurking in the shadows, it's a story woven with fear, tragedy, and mystery. It is a saga that began in the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia in the mid-1960s, and it has never truly ended. On the evening of November 15, 1966, two young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Mallet, were out driving near an abandoned munitions site just outside of Point Pleasant, an area the locals called the TNT area. Once used during World War II to store explosives, the site had since become overgrown with trees and riddled with concrete igloos, eerie in its abandonment. As the couples drove down a lonely stretch of road, their headlights cut through the darkness. That was when Linda spotted something strange by the roadside. At first, she thought it was a large animal, but as the light caught it, her breath hitched. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear, it was something else entirely. The figure stood over 7 feet tall, with glowing red eyes that seemed to burn in the dark. Its wings stretched wide, wider than the car itself, they later claimed. Its body was humanoid, but monstrous, its head low against its shoulders. Terrified, Roger floored the accelerator. The car tore down the road, but the creature didn't vanish into the woods as one might expect. Instead, it unfurled its massive wings and rose into the air, chasing the car. For miles, the thing kept up, its wings beating silently, its glowing eyes never breaking contact. The couples were frantic. By the time they reached town, they were pale, shaking, and swore they had seen something not of this earth. This was the first widely reported sighting of the Mothman, but it would not be the last. Over the following year, Point Pleasant would become a town living under a shadow. Reports poured in of a strange creature haunting the skies. It was seen near the TNT area, on country roads, even outside homes late at night. Some claimed it screeched, a high-pitched sound that chilled them to the bone. Others said it was silent, the only sound being the rush of air as its wings carried it overhead. Farmers reported livestock going missing or found mutilated in ways they couldn't explain. But it wasn't just sightings. Strange phenomena seemed to accompany the creature. Men in black appeared in town, questioning witnesses and warning them to stay silent. People reported odd electrical disturbances, radios crackling with static, televisions flickering without cause. Some even claimed to see UFOs in the skies above Point Pleasant, as though the Mothman was part of something bigger, something cosmic. For many, the red-eyed monster was more than just a cryptid, it was an omen. The height of the Mothman sightings came in late 1967. The people of Point Pleasant were anxious, but life went on until December 15, 1967, when tragedy struck. The Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, was packed with holiday traffic when it suddenly collapsed into the icy waters of the Ohio River. 46 people died in the disaster. It was one of the worst tragedies the small town had ever experienced. And almost immediately, whispers began. The Mothman had been seen near the bridge days before the collapse. Witnesses claimed its glowing red eyes had watched from the steel beams. Some swore they saw it perched high above as the bridge gave way. Was the creature a harbinger of doom, warning the town of the catastrophe to come? Or was it somehow responsible? No one could say for sure. But after the collapse, the sightings all but stopped. It was as though the Mothman had vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only questions and grief. Over the years, theories about the Mothman have spiraled in countless directions. Some believe it to be a cryptid, a yet undiscovered species of winged creature that stalks the night. Others claim it is extraterrestrial, tied to the UFO activity reported in the region during the 1960s. Folklorists point out that Appalachian legends are filled with strange winged beings and warnings of disaster. Perhaps the Mothman is simply the newest incarnation of an old myth. Still others believe the Mothman is a supernatural omen, appearing before great tragedies. Similar winged figures have allegedly been spotted before other disasters, nuclear accidents, earthquakes, and even 9/11. For the people of Point Pleasant, the truth may never be known, but the memory of that year and of the shadow that haunted their skies remains. Today, the Mothman is more than just a story, it's a cultural phenomenon. Point Pleasant holds an annual Mothman festival, drawing tourists, cryptid hunters, and the simply curious. A towering Mothman statue stands in the center of town, its metal wings glinting in the sun, its red eyes forever glowing. But for those who lived through the events of 1966-1967, it is not just a legend to sell on t-shirts and keychains. It is a memory of fear, of tragedy, and of the unknown. Linda Scarberry, one of the original witnesses, later said, "You don't forget those eyes. They were red and they were glowing. I wish I could forget them, but I can't." The Appalachian Mountains are filled with countless mysteries, whispers of ghosts, strange creatures, and things unseen. But the story of the Mothman is one that cuts deeper. It reminds us that sometimes the line between folklore and reality is blurred, that the world is stranger than we want to believe. And perhaps somewhere in the woods beyond Point Pleasant, under the cover of night, a pair of red eyes still watches from the shadows, waiting for the next tragedy, or simply waiting to be remembered. Because legends like the Mothman never truly die. The Appalachian Mountains have always held secrets. Their ridges stretch like the bones of the earth, their forests sheltering shadows older than the settlers who carved their lives into the wilderness. Among these legends, one of the darkest, most grotesque, and most enduring is that of the Snallygaster, a creature said to stalk the night skies of Maryland and the broader Appalachian region. To those who claim to have heard its unholy cry or seen the sweep of its monstrous wings blot out the moon, the tale is no folk tale, it is a nightmare with flesh and bone. The earliest whispers began in the 18th century when German immigrants moved into the valleys of western Maryland. These were people familiar with the old world's monsters. Tales of dragons, witches, and devils had followed them across the Atlantic, carried in the lullabies and warnings they passed to their children. But even they were not prepared for the thing that seemed to lurk in the Appalachian shadows. Farmers spoke of hearing a piercing screech, unlike any hawk, owl, or wolf. Something in the pitch of that cry set their teeth on edge, as though the very air had turned against them. The first victims were livestock. Goats found drained of blood, chickens torn to pieces with their heads missing, cattle mutilated in ways no natural predator would attempt. Hunters blamed packs of wild dogs or perhaps desperate men stealing food. But when farmers began to notice claw marks gouged deep into the wood of their barns, marks higher than a man could reach, the whispers turned towards something else. It wasn't long before sightings began. A group of travelers returning from Hagerstown claimed they had seen a beast swoop down from the mountains, its body like that of a dragon, its wings leathery and vast, its eyes glowing like lanterns. It carried the head of a bird, its beak serrated like a saw, and talons that could shear through iron. The description spread quickly, and soon the word snallygaster appeared in hushed conversations, a corruption, some say, of the German schneller Geister, or quick spirit. The snallygaster was not a passive monster. It did not merely haunt the skies, it hunted men. One account tells of a farmer's son who vanished while returning from the fields. His body was never found, but the earth bore deep gouges as though something enormous had dragged him into the air. Mothers began to keep their children indoors after dark. Fathers patrolled with rifles, though it was said that bullets bounced harmlessly off the beast's hide. As the years passed, the legend grew darker. The snallygaster was said to thirst for blood, swooping upon unwary travelers and draining them like a vampire. Its screech was an omen of death, carrying across the valleys, echoing from ridge to ridge, until even the strongest men shivered in their cabins. In some tales, the creature was described as half bird, half reptile, with tentacles sprouting hideously from its mouth. In others, it bore the features of a demon with a single blazing eye set into its forehead. The variations did not lessen the terror. If anything, they made the monster more terrible, suggesting it was not one creature but many, or worse, a shape-shifting horror. During the early 1900s, reports of the snallygaster exploded into national attention. Newspapers across Maryland and beyond carried sensational accounts of the beast. In 1909, an article claimed that the creature had been sighted over Frederick County, swooping low over towns, its wings spanning 25 feet. Witnesses described it as shrieking like a locomotive whistle, its breath reeking of sulfur. Farmers found more mutilated animals, and the whispers once again turned into fearful prayers. One account from that period tells of a man named Charles who lived near Middletown. He had long dismissed the stories as superstition. But one winter night, while tending to his cattle, he heard the scream. At first he thought it was a train, but no tracks lay near his farm. Then came the sound of wings, heavy, leathery, beating against the cold air. He looked up and saw a shadow blot out the stars. The creature landed atop his barn with a thud that shook the timbers. Its talons scraped against the roof as it craned its bird-like head toward him, eyes glowing. Charles raised his shotgun and fired. The pellet struck true, but the monster barely flinched. It let out a shriek so powerful it burst one of the barn windows. Charles fled into the night, and when he returned at dawn, he found his cattle slaughtered, their blood staining the snow. He left Maryland within the year, never to return. The hysteria grew so fierce that even the federal government took notice. There are stories, half rumor, half forgotten headline, that President Theodore Roosevelt himself considered hunting the snallygaster. Known for his love of adventure, Roosevelt allegedly delayed an African safari to investigate the creature. Whether or not he ever seriously considered it, the rumor reflected how real the monster had become in the public imagination. But it wasn't just one monster. In 1909, reports claimed that multiple snallygasters had been seen swooping together like carrion birds. Some swore they had seen the creatures fighting among themselves in the skies, talons locked, screeches tearing through the night. If one snallygaster was terror enough, the thought of many was nearly unbearable. The snallygaster's legend also carried a strange spiritual weight. Preachers warned their congregations that the beast was a demon sent by God as punishment for sin. They claimed its sulphurous stench was proof of its infernal origin, its bloodlust a sign of Satan's hand in the mountains. Families prayed more fervently, and the churches filled even as the nights grew quieter, everyone waiting for the next scream in the dark. In the 1920s, the snallygaster returned with a vengeance. Newspapers once again filled with reports of sightings. The most famous incident occurred in 1923 when a man named George from Frederick County reported seeing the beast fly directly over his house. He described it as a winged creature with a beak like metal, dripping with what looked like blood. It hovered in the air with unnatural stillness before darting away with impossible speed. That same week, a group of men exploring the mountains discovered a series of enormous footprints, three-toed and deep enough to suggest a creature weighing several hundred pounds. They tried to follow the trail, but it ended abruptly, as though the monster had taken flight. The climax came in 1932. A group of moonshiners operating an illegal still near Frog Hollow reported being attacked by the snallygaster. They claimed it descended upon them in a fury of wings and talons, smashing their barrels and scattering them into the woods. Days later, a headline declared that the monster had fallen into a vat of boiling alcohol and drowned. Government agents supposedly confirmed the story, destroying the evidence along with the still. Whether this was an attempt to suppress panic or a convenient explanation to cover the moonshiner's arrest, no one knew. But the story of the snallygaster's death was not the end. Even now, people whisper of its return. Hikers in the Appalachians claim to hear the screech echoing across the ridges. Farmers report missing animals, their blood drained in strange ways. Campers awake to find claw marks carved into the trees around their tents, and sometimes, on clear nights when the moon hangs low and the valleys are quiet, shadows pass over the hills, too large for any bird, too swift for any plane. The snallygaster has become part of Maryland's cultural identity, a monster that refuses to die. But to those who believe, it is more than folklore. It is a predator still hunting, a horror that has learned patience. Its legend feeds on fear, and fear is never in short supply. The people of Appalachia know this, and they know the forests hold things that do not care whether they are believed. One particularly chilling story comes from the 1970s. A young couple camping near South Mountain reported waking in the middle of the night to the sound of wings. The woman swore she saw a massive shadow move across the canvas of their tent, followed by a screech so loud she felt it in her chest. Her boyfriend went outside with a flashlight. He never returned. In the morning, she was found wandering the trails, hysterical, her clothes stained with blood. His body was never recovered. Skeptics dismissed the snallygaster as nothing more than folklore, a fusion of German immigrant tales and newspaper hoaxes. They argue that sightings can be explained by owls, eagles, or mass hysteria. But for those who have looked into the night sky and seen a shape larger than any bird, for those who have heard the scream that freezes the marrow in their bones, no explanation will suffice. The snallygaster is real, and it waits. The forests of Appalachia are endless, their valleys deep and shadowed, their ridges ancient and worn. It would not be difficult for a monster to hide there, unseen for years, appearing only when hunger strikes. Perhaps the snallygaster is not one creature, but a lineage, offspring born of something prehistoric, surviving in the wilderness, feeding on fear as much as flesh. Perhaps the tentacled mouth and glowing eyes are not exaggerations, but glimpses of something beyond human comprehension, something that does not belong to this earth. As long as the Appalachian winds whisper through the trees, as long as the valleys lie cloaked in fog, the snallygaster's story will remain. It is not merely a tale to frighten children, but a warning. Some predators do not need to be seen to be real. Some monsters are patient, and some legends are carved not in words, but in the blood of those who vanished into the night, carried away by wings that left no trace but terror. The snallygaster lives in the spaces between belief and dread, in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, where the trees are tall, the nights are long, and the scream of something ancient still rides the wind. The Appalachian Mountains are not just rolling green peaks and winding trails, they are also a place where the earth seems to hold on to secrets, refusing to give them back. Among the countless unsettling tales whispered around campfires or passed down through families, one story still shakes even the most hardened hikers and park rangers. The disappearance of a boy named Dennis Martin. It was the summer of 1969, and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park was alive with tourists. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and families trekked deep into the trails, eager for adventure. The Martin family had made it a tradition to spend Father's Day camping in the wilderness. Bill Martin, a loving father, brought his two sons, Dennis and Douglas, along with his father, Dennis's grandfather. Together they hiked into the thick forest near Spence Field, a lush meadow that spread like a clearing in the endless trees. Dennis was 6 years old, a small boy with a quiet demeanor but a mischievous streak when he was with his brother and cousins. That day, the children were plotting a playful ambush on the adults. It was supposed to be a simple game of hide and seek in the tall grass and under the shade of towering trees. The adults stood chatting in the field while the children crouched low, darting behind bushes, preparing to leap out with a playful roar. But Dennis, smaller and quieter, decided to sneak off in a different direction, just a few steps further into the brush where the shadows were denser. He was gone only a moment, hidden by the sway of leaves. His family saw the other children leap out, laughing, startling the adults. Everyone expected Dennis to follow, grinning, dirt smudged on his cheeks. But Dennis never appeared. At first, it was a laugh, a moment of, "Where's Dennis?" His father called his name, expecting the boy to giggle and run back. Minutes passed, the calls grew louder. His grandfather joined in, searching the nearby bushes. Soon, panic replaced playfulness. Bill Martin ran down the trails, shouting his son's name until his voice broke. The sun was still high, the air thick and green, but suddenly everything felt wrong. The Smokies seemed to swallow sound, leaving only the buzzing of insects and the rustle of unseen movement. When the search officially began, it became one of the largest manhunts in the history of the National Park Service. Hundreds of people, rangers, volunteers, Boy Scouts, and Green Berets combed the forest. Helicopters flew overhead, their blades chopping through the mist, while bloodhounds sniffed desperately for a trail. But the dogs found nothing, not even a scrap of fabric, not a footprint in the mud. It was as though the boy had vanished into thin air. Some said Dennis had simply gotten lost, wandering too far into the vast, confusing wilderness. Others whispered darker theories. One of the strangest accounts came from another family hiking miles away on the same day. They claimed they heard a terrible, loud scream in the woods, so sudden and unnatural it made the hair on their necks stand on end. Soon after, they reported seeing something or someone moving through the trees. At first glance, they thought it was a man, but his appearance was strange, wild, and unsettling. His clothing, if he wore any, seemed ragged. His body was lean, pale, and fast, darting through the brush with inhuman swiftness. He carried something slung over his shoulder, but from the distance, it was impossible to tell what it was. The family didn't know a boy had gone missing at that time. Only later, when they heard of Dennis's disappearance, did they put the details together. Could that figure have been carrying Dennis? Was it a wild man, a feral person, rumored to live off the grid in the Appalachians? Or was it something older, something the forest had kept hidden for centuries? Search efforts continued for weeks. The Martin family refused to leave, clinging to hope. The forest gave them nothing back. No clothing, no body, no trace. It was as though Dennis had been swallowed whole. Whispers spread quickly in Appalachia. Locals spoke of feral people living deep in the Smokies, descendants of those who had long since cut ties with society, surviving in caves and dense brush, preying on the occasional wanderer, unlucky enough to stumble into their territory. Others spoke of darker forces, spirits tied to the land, taking what they wanted in exchange for silence. The official explanation was inconclusive. Rangers insisted it was likely Dennis had gotten lost and died from exposure. His body never recovered due to the vast wilderness. But locals shook their heads. They had walked those trails all their lives and knew how the forest gave up what it took eventually. Bears left remains, coyotes left bones, but in Dennis's case, the forest gave back nothing. Years later, the case still haunts park rangers. Many refuse to speak about it. Those who do often lower their voices as if afraid the forest itself is listening. The Martin family never fully recovered. Bill Martin, in particular, carried the grief in silence for the rest of his life. To this day, hikers in the Smokies claim they hear children's laughter echoing through the trees, far from any trails. Some swear they've seen small footprints appear in the mud, only to vanish after a few steps. A few have reported seeing pale, fast-moving figures slipping between the trees, always just out of reach, always watching. And then there are the screams. That same chilling scream, reported in 1969, still gets whispered about by campers who wake in the middle of the night. It cuts through the silence of the Appalachian dark, raw and sharp, as though something or someone is forever reliving that terrible day. The forest remembers, and it keeps its secrets. The vanishing of Dennis Martin is more than just an unsolved case. It is a reminder that the Appalachians are not tame, not safe, and not always what they seem. For every trail marker and campsite, there are places where maps blur, where ancient rules still hold sway, and where sometimes the mountain takes someone and never lets them go. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where the mist curls low across the valleys and the forests stretch on without end, there are stories older than the settlers who carved their homes among the ridges. The Cherokee and other mountain folk carried these stories in whispers, told beside campfires when the night pressed close and the wolves howled in the distance. Among the most enduring and most feared is the legend of the Wampus Cat, a creature neither man nor beast, cursed and doomed, yet prowling eternally through the dark woods. The Wampus Cat is said to stalk the foothills of Tennessee, Kentucky, the Carolinas, and beyond. Descriptions vary, but most agree it is a monstrous thing, a cat the size of a panther, its eyes glowing like burning coals, its fur dark and bristling, its teeth gleaming sharp. But those who look too long see something more, something wrong. For behind the feline face there is a trace of humanity, an echo of sorrow in the eyes, a twist of anguish in the snarl, the shape of hands beneath the claws. It is a beast cursed by magic, a punishment made flesh, doomed to wander the mountains with a hunger that will never be filled. One of the oldest Cherokee stories tells how the Wampus Cat was once a woman. She lived among her people in a village near the Smoky Mountains. Her husband was a great hunter, strong and respected, who often joined the men in their sacred rituals before the hunt. These rituals were powerful, guarded by secrecy, for they called upon spirits and gods of the forest to guide the men and protect them. Women were forbidden from watching, but the woman was curious. Perhaps it was jealousy of her husband's connection to the spirits, perhaps simple defiance, or perhaps she longed to claim some of that power for herself. One night, while the hunters gathered in a clearing to perform their sacred rites, she followed, hidden beneath a mask of a mountain cat's face, creeping among the shadows. From behind a tree she watched as the firelight flickered over painted faces, as the men chanted and danced, summoning the spirits of the hunt. The spirits saw her. The hunters felt the disruption, their chant faltering, their fire sputtering. The mask she wore fell, and she stood revealed in the glow of the flames. The men recoiled, for her crime was not simply curiosity, it was blasphemy, a violation of balance. The medicine man called upon the spirits to punish her. In a voice that shook the earth, the spirits cursed her to wear the skin she had stolen, to become the beast she had pretended to be. Her body twisted, her cries turned to roars, and her hands curled into claws. Her eyes glowed with fire, her teeth lengthened, and the woman was no more. In her place stood the first Wampus Cat, doomed to stalk the forest forever, alone and hungering. From that night on, the Wampus Cat was feared. It prowled the edges of the village, its eyes gleaming in the dark. Livestock disappeared. Hunters went missing. The sound of its scream echoed through the valleys, half woman, half beast, enough to freeze blood in the veins. Some said the woman's spirit still lived inside, weeping, mourning her fate, but the hunger of the beast always overcame her sorrow. She could never return home. She could never be at peace. The Cherokee told children to stay close to their parents, never wander alone, for the Wampus Cat might be waiting. If you heard your name whispered in the woods, they said, do not answer. It was the Wampus Cat luring you deeper. If you saw glowing eyes in the dark, run. If you smelled the stench of decay when nobody was near, hide. For when the Wampus Cat came, there was no escape. As time passed and settlers came to the mountains, the legend grew. The Wampus Cat became a story shared around frontier hearths. Farmers claimed to see it stalking their fields at night, its shadows sliding across the moonlit ground. Hunters swore they felt it watching from the trees, its breath hot on their necks, though nothing could be seen. It was blamed for torn-apart cattle, for bloodless carcasses left in the woods, for sudden disappearances. Its cry, a chilling mix of a woman's scream and a panther's roar, became a sound of pure dread, an omen of death. One chilling tale tells of a group of settlers traveling through the mountains in winter. The snow lay deep, and the trees groaned under ice. They camped near a frozen creek, huddling around the fire for warmth. That night, the horses grew restless, stamping and snorting, their eyes rolling white. The travelers heard something moving just beyond the firelight, circling. Then came the scream, piercing and terrible, echoing off the cliffs. A woman's cry, followed by a roar that shook the trees. Panic spread. The men snatched their rifles, but when the creature lunged from the shadows, the fire revealed not a panther, but a twisted form with glowing eyes and hands that seemed almost human. Shots rang out, smoke filling the air, but when it cleared, the wampus cat was gone. In the morning, they found the tracks, huge paw prints that sank deep into the snow, leading into the forest. But alongside them were faint impressions, like the marks of bare human feet, walking side by side with the beast. Another story tells of a miner in eastern Tennessee in the late 1800s. He had heard the stories all his life, but dismissed them as superstition. One evening, walking home alone after a long shift underground, he cut through the forest to save time. The moon was high, the trees silver with light. At first, he felt nothing but exhaustion. Then the woods grew quiet. The crickets stilled, the wind died. He felt eyes upon him. When he turned, he saw them, two glowing orbs low to the ground, watching. He raised his lantern, the flame trembling, and saw the shape crouched at the edge of the trail. A cat, massive, its teeth bared, but its face was wrong. The eyes seemed almost human, filled with rage and sorrow. Its scream shattered the night, and the miner fled, running blindly until he reached home, his clothes torn by branches, his mind scarred forever. He swore never to walk alone again, and when he spoke of what he saw, he wept as he described the face that still haunted him. The wampus cat's curse was not just to kill, it was to torment. The Cherokee said she preyed on the weak, the lonely, those who wandered too far from the fire. She fed not only on flesh but on fear. The scream was her weapon, a sound that broke courage, that lured people to their doom. Some claimed she could enter dreams, stalking her victims even as they slept. They would wake, screaming, claw marks across their skin, though no animal had entered their lodge. Others swore she could move like smoke, appearing and vanishing, her form melting into the trees. No barrier stopped her. No lock kept her out. The mountains are full of caves, deep and dark, where sunlight never reaches. It is said the wampus cat makes her lair in these caverns. Bones litter the ground, both animal and human, gnawed and scattered. If you find a cave where the air smells of blood and rot, do not enter, for it may be hers. Old hunters spoke of finding claw marks carved into stone, deep as though cut with steel, signs of her restless fury. Some said she carved them to remind herself of what she had lost, each mark a tally of the years she wandered cursed. Yet for all the horror, there was pity in the tale, for the wampus cat was not born a monster, she was made one. Her cries at night were not only hunger, but grief. Some believed that if one listened closely, behind the roar, you could hear a woman's sobs echoing through the valleys. The curse had bound her forever, but her humanity was never fully gone. And that perhaps was the most terrifying truth of all, that within the beast still lived the soul of a woman, trapped and broken, forced to prey upon those she once called kin. Even now, in the remote hollows of Appalachia, people claim to see her. Hunters tell of glowing eyes in the brush, too high to be an animal, too low to be a man. Farmers whisper of livestock slaughtered without a sound, their livers missing, their carcasses left in neat piles. Campers wake to find tracks circling their tents, the paw prints far too large to belong to any known beast. And sometimes, just before dawn, a scream rolls down the mountains, a sound that freezes the blood of anyone who hears it. Skeptics call it folklore, a story born of fear and superstition. But those who live in the shadow of the Appalachians know better. They know the mountains are old, older than memory, and they keep their secrets well. They know the Wampus cat is not just a tale, but a warning. And when they sit by the fire at night, the flames flickering against their faces, they tell their children, never wander into the woods alone, never follow the sound of your name, never trust the cry of a woman in the night. For it may be her, the cursed one, the woman turned beast, the Wampus cat, still searching, still hungering, still bound to the mountains that birthed her. The legend endures because fear endures, and as long as the forests of Appalachia remain dark and endless, as long as the mountains rise like sleeping giants against the sky, the Wampus cat will walk. She is the shadow between the trees, the gleam of eyes in the night, the cry that steals your courage. She is hunger made flesh, sorrow made monstrous, the curse of curiosity and defiance. And if you hear her scream, pray it is far away, for if it is near, there is nothing you can do. The Wampus cat comes for all who stray too far, and once she has chosen you, the mountains themselves will not save you.